Get going. Good evening and welcome everyone. Thank you for being here. We're so happy that you were all able to come out tonight. And also welcome to our live stream there. My name's Art Disloges, and I am a member of all three sponsoring groups that are organizing this. So they asked me to just explain what we're going to do here tonight. We're here to help homeowners understand ways the government will help you pay for and improve solar panels on your home. I'm going to just tell you who the sponsors are. The Plymouth Library, of course, thank you. Plymouth Area League of Women Voters. They're a nonpartisan political organization, basically dedicated to promoting democracy here in Plymouth. They're very active in voting and civic and sustainability things. The League of Women Voters is a great organization to join and make friends. They have a lot of great work committees you can be on. Sustainable Plymouth is a nonprofit group. They're of environmentally conscientious volunteers, and they work on a number of volunteer type programs that are very local. They have great leadership, and they have made a big impact here on Plymouth. They're also sponsored by the Citizens Climate Lobby. They're a nonpartisan volunteer-run organization with over 200,000 members. They meet every year with Congress and advocate for certain legislation. And Linda is the chair, I guess, of the Plymouth chapter, and she's always looking for volunteers. Very exciting group to be on. All right, we're pleased to announce today we have Phil Angell, a Plymouth resident and solar designer. He will talk about, and he knows about all things solar. He has been in the construction industry most of his life and specialized in solar since 2014. That is when he and his wife, Sandra, completed their high efficiency home here in Plymouth and installed a solar array on their roof. He holds a construction supervisor's license, has received certification from the North American Board of Certified Energy Practitioners, passive house consultant training, and most recently received a part, hope this is right, 107 drone license in order to integrate photography into solar evaluation and design. That sounds very exciting. Okay. Please hold your questions to the end, and we will end right on at 8 o'clock. And there's flyers on your chair and in the back for more information. So, Phil, thank you.
Thank you, Art. And I will echo what he said, that these are some really great groups to get involved in if anybody's looking for a group. I'm a member of Citizens Climate Lobby and have been for a number of years, and we get a lot of work done. So it's a really terrific group. I'm very pleased to be here tonight. This is our second annual solar night. We had a talk last night too, or last year as well. I don't recognize any faces, so that's good. So my first question is, are we ready to have some fun tonight? Can everybody hear me? Okay. Well, if you are, I'm sorry, but we're going to talk about solar instead. But maybe we'll have some fun later. So here's what we're going to go over. Solar is different in every state. Massachusetts happens to have some really great incentives and some other qualities that make it one of the best places to go solar in the country. We're going to go over some of the basics of how solar works, whether or not you want to plan for future expansion, electric vehicle or a heat pump, different ways that you can acquire solar through ownership and third-party ownership, battery storage, which a lot of people are really interested in, but there's a lot of misunderstandings about battery storage. How you can find somebody to do it for you. What are some of the tips on finding somebody who you'll be happy with? And the incentives and programs, the financial incentives. So in 2005, early adopters had, it says 297 projects. You can see that, not surprisingly, they're grouped around Amherst, Boston, and Martha's Vineyard, and Falmouth, sort of progressive communities. And then 15 years later, much more saturation, And between 2020 and 2023, solar installations doubled almost every year. So now now it would be solid yellow most likely. So how do solar panels work? The very most important ingredient for solar to work is in the foreground. It's those two lovely folks there who decided to go solar, because without that, it doesn't matter how good your roof is. It's really a personal decision, and it's really a cultural phenomenon in a lot of ways. But once someone does decide to go solar, there are some limitations and some things you have to be aware of. You have to have the right roof. You have to have some financial wherewithal, and so forth. So I think everybody kind of knows that solar panels make electricity. Maybe you don't, because in the 70s it was hot water panels that were so popular, and nobody really uses those too much anymore. Mostly now it's solar panels, and they're called PV or photovoltaic. The electrons rush from one side, from the front side to the back side when the sun strikes them, and that electricity is captured and run through your house so that you can use it. It's measured in kW. kW is kilowatts, and that's 1,000 watts. So the system my wife and I have at home, we have 20 panels that are each 260 watts. So 20 times 260 is 5,600. So that's a 5,600 watt system, or 5.6 kW system, or 5.6 K. If you're really hip, you can just say K. That's not the same as the production. So if you put a 5.6 K in a real shady place, it's not going to produce as much electricity as a 5.6 K on a really good roof. Ours happens to be a really good roof, so we produce about 6,300 kilowatt hours per year. So the range is going to be somewhere a little bit above or a little bit below that nameplate rating. The 5.6 K will produce usually somewhere between 5 and 7 or 5 and 6.5 thousand kilowatt hours per year. So the things that affect it are shading. We have a lot of shading in Massachusetts, the direction of the roof, the pitch of the roof. The average, from my experience, is around 7 kW on a home, but there are some that are much bigger, and some that are quite a bit smaller. The smaller ones quite often are limited by roof size, not by consumption. So one thing I want to point out here, most people who put solar around put it on their roof. There's other ways to do it, but the roof is most common. It's the best bang for your buck. You'll notice in the far left part of that picture, these are L plates, L brackets, and flashing. So there's roof penetrations. You might have a couple of dozen roof penetrations when you put solar on your roof. So you need to be aware of that. The equipment is designed in such a way that it should never leak. But it's got to be installed properly. So if you have a metal roof, you can usually just clamp it on. But if you have a shingle roof, then you're going to have a lot of penetrations. They need to be done properly. The rails go up next, and then the panels clamp, top clamps and end clamps to the rails themselves. This particular system, all the electricity is gathered in a metal conduit and goes down to this inverter, which is usually in a garage or a basement. That's just one way to do it. The other way to do it is to have a little micro inverter for each panel. So either way, that's what converts the electricity from DC to AC. The panels produce DC, direct current, like a battery, and in your home you use AC, alternating current. I like the micro inverters better. They have a 25-year warranty, and they generally last beyond that. They're waterproof. They're no fuss, and the other thing I like about them is there's no single point of failure. Whereas with a central inverter, all that electricity going through it, you sort of do expect them to fail after 12 or 13 years. And sort of build that into your expectation. And when it goes down, the system's down. It's not working at all anymore. So how does it connect to your house? This is what we really like to see if we're evaluating a home. See how the space at the bottom of the main service panel? Well, all you would need to do is knock out 2 of those blanks and put in a double pole breaker, and that's where you would connect your solar. Some people have their panel box completely filled up. That's not at all uncommon. They even have split breakers in there. So then you do it inside the box. It's called the line side tap, and it would be up in this region where the main lines come in. You would just clamp to them. So even if your panel's full, you can still connect solar to it. So the basics are that the sun strikes the panels. As I said, the electrons race to the back of the panel, and there's a wire in between. So then they get channeled down into, in this case, it's showing the central inverter, which converts it to AC. And so that's a red line. This is DC coming down. It converts, now it's AC. This is a little revenue meter. So it's counting how much electricity is made, because a lot of the incentives, you get paid by the amount of electricity you make. From there, it's going into that main service panel where you make the connection. And you may notice that the arrows are one direction this way, coming out of the service panel. That's the electricity feeding your appliances, feeding the load. This way, the arrows are going both directions. So if it's a real sunny day and you're not using much electricity, if it's a mild day on April, May, or June, and you're producing a lot of electricity and the air conditioner's not on, the heat's not on, the lights aren't on, you're going to produce a lot more than you use. And in that case, the electricity is going to flow out. It just flows the path of least resistance. So it'll flow out to your power lines, and your neighbors will draw it into their house where they need it. One thing they're not showing here is in between your main service panel and the lines, you have a meter, right? You have an electric meter. When you go solar, they come and change it out into a net meter. You want to wait until they change it out before you turn the lever on your solar panel, because otherwise, if you're making electricity and you don't have a net meter, you're going to pay for the electricity you give to Eversource, because it only counts electricity going through until it's a net meter. Then it counts it both ways. So it goes forward or back. So on a sunny day in the spring or fall, your meter is actually going to count down. We don't have the wheels to spin anymore, which is too bad, because that was fun. But it does count backwards. So let's see, did I miss anything? The extra electricity goes out. We're going to be talking about that in a little more detail, but you do get full credit for it, or very nearly full credit financially from, is everybody here Eversource? Anybody National Grid or Muni? National Grid? Okay. There's also some municipal power plants. Hingham has one, Hull has one, Attleboro, Taunton, and they're a lot trickier to deal with, but you can still go solar in those places if you know anybody there. Linda and I were looking at this and wondering, why did they choose such an ugly picture for the grid? And I think the reason is they're saying when the grid goes down, the solar shuts off, which you should know ahead of time, because it's really disappointing if no one told you that, and you have solar panels and the lights go off your neighbors and your lights go out too, and it's sunny. It's like, what's going on? What about my solar panels? They shut off instantly, because the inverter, whether it's a micro inverter or a central inverter, is always sensing that the grid. And if it senses that the grid's not there anymore, it just shuts off, because otherwise it's going to be exporting electricity and enlivening wires and hurting workers who are out there trying to fix the lines. So they immediately shut off. And I think the reason they chose this is these up here are actually breakers. And this pole up here, sometimes you see linemen out there working with the pole after a storm, they're resetting the breakers. So those are up on top of poles. They're actually physical breakers. And I think that's why it's Mass Clean Energy Center who put together a lot of these slides. So I think that's why they use this slide. So if you have a battery, then the battery can fool your inverter into thinking the power's still on, and you can continue as normal. That's one of the real benefits of a battery, is your solar panels will still work if you have a battery. If you don't have a battery, your solar panels won't work. They'll shut off until the power is restored. So what makes a good site? You know, that's a really loaded question. It depends on what you're looking for with solar. Some people, my wife and I had a house in Marshfield, and when we first looked at solar, it was a Marshfield Energy Challenge, and it was a special program. And as long as it was less than Eversource, we were good to go. And that's about what it was. It was about a 20-year payback. It wasn't a real high producing system, but it was good enough. It was what we wanted. If that's your motivation, if you really like the intangibles, the green effects, and producing your own electricity, and capturing some of this sunlight to make your own electricity, then you may not have as high of an expectation for payback as if you are doing it for purely financial reasons. So whenever I talk to people, I try to understand what their motivation is. If it's purely for financial reasons, then one of the ways we evaluate is how long will it take the system to pay for itself. So it always will. So the average right now is probably 6.5 years, 7 years, something like that. And the panels and inverters are warranted for 25 years. So those are sort of the basics financially. It's going to pay for itself in around 7 years and then run for another, however many years that is, 18 years or more. So here are the things that affect it. The angle, as I said, and it doesn't really have to be angled 30 to 45 degrees, but that's ideal for our latitude. It can be nearly flat. Even 5-degree pitch will produce electricity. You look for 6 hours of direct sunlight average. This time of year, it's a lot different than in January. I have a lot of people who put solar on their house, and in December, January, February, the sun doesn't hit the panels because there's all tall white pine trees around them. The sun's just too low. They just don't make, they make almost no electricity during that time, but they're still happy with their system. And you, of course, you need open roof area. If your house is covered with dormers or valleys or hips, it's going to be a little harder to design a system. And if none of that works, then there's always the ground mount option. So you've probably seen ground mounts. Some of them are rows that are on racks. And there's also single pole ground mounts. If you have to look a little harder for them. Quite often they actually are trackers, 2-axis trackers. So they'll tilt and follow the sun. And they produce almost 60% more electricity. They're a lot more expensive, but those are really nice too. The most efficient cost-wise is putting it on your roof, as long as your roof is reasonably good. So I don't know if you're going to be able to see this well, but I wanted to get an electric bill up here so you could do a little bit of your own sleuthing if you wanted to, and tell you how it's done. This is an older electric bill. It is Eversource, and it's a 2-page bill, so you can see both pages there. And this is the area we're interested in right here, because this has your monthly usage in kilowatt hours. And it's got actually 13 months because it starts with August and it ends with August. So the last one is the most recent August. But this particular customer in August, they used, you probably can't read it, I'm not sure if I can, 1,587 and 1,733 the month before. If you look at this particular electric bill, it's low in the fall, it's low in the spring, it's high in the summer. So that's an air conditioning load. It's worth looking at your electric bill too, critically, because you might find that, holy cow, we used 3,000 kilowatt hours in January. Maybe you had some resistance electric heat on it and didn't even know it. Because if you have a really high load in the winter, it's probably resistance heat. So our first step is to take the most recent 12 months and add them together. In this case, it came out to 13,200 or something along those lines. So it's a big usage. It's maybe double the average. This is a big house, and they must have kept their windows closed. And then the next thing you want to do is figure out how much you're paying for electricity. And right down here is the total for this bill, $423. And up here, it's got a customer charge of $7. So even if you have solar, you're going to pay a customer charge. So in all fairness, you really deduct that from the $423. And so for $423, here's the electricity you're getting, 1,587 kilowatt hours. So you just divide 423 minus 7. So 416 divided by 1,587, and it worked out to about 26 cents per kilowatt hour. People would kill for that right now. It's more like 36 cents now. It's gone up quite a bit in the last 2 years. So that's what you look for. And you can also figure out, what you're going to pay for electricity going forward. You can figure out how much is solar going to cost, how much is not going solar going to cost. So you can make a fair comparison. So a lot of people are thinking about EVs in the future, and a lot of people who aren't thinking about them might have them too, because it seems like they're going to become more and more prevalent. EVs use a lot of electricity. My little Prius has a 5K battery, so it goes 30 miles. And in those 30 miles, that's how much electricity I use in my house for a whole day. So if you drive a lot and you're going to have an electric car, you're going to need a lot of electricity if you want to completely cover it. The other image is for heat pumps. So heat pumps also are becoming much more common. They're very efficient. A lot of people think they can put a heat pump in and just go completely electric, and heat pumps really don't produce as much electricity as an oil burner or an oil furnace. So heat pumps are a little tricky to size, but they can always be used in addition to oil and gas too. We also just put in an induction stove, which I really love. It's really fast, it's really efficient, and we took the gas tank right out of our house, no more propane. So now that you've decided you want solar, how do you get it? There's a lot of ways to get it. If you're lucky enough to be able to write a check for the amount, that's terrific. I would say that everyone's different. The more electricity you use, the bigger system you're going to need to offset it. It's not based on the size of your house. It's based on how much electricity you use. I would say right now, the average person is looking at maybe around $30,000 for a system that will cover all of their electrical usage. You just purchased a system, right? Was yours in that area? 35,000. Okay. So If you don't use air conditioning, it's gonna be less, because that's the big one. If you don't have a pool and you don't use air conditioning, you don't have a heat pump, then you're gonna use a lot less electricity. I've seen people down to 4,000, 5,000 kilowatt hours per year. But if you can write a check, that's great. Not everybody can do that. Financing it is another option. UMass 5 has a solar loan. There's no more Massachusetts solar loan. There's no zero interest loan. It's too bad, because it seems like a great thing for the government to do for us. They do some other things for us, though. I always felt the best way to finance it is through a HELOC, a home equity line of credit. Those of you who aren't familiar with it, it's a loan against your house, and it's prime minus a half a point usually, so it's a little high right now. But you can pay interest only, or you can pay the whole thing off at once, and you have a little more control over it, and you may have a tax benefit from it as well. So I think that's a great way to finance solar. That's what we did with our house here in Plymouth. The next two, power purchase agreement and leases, that's if somebody else owns a solar system. So these are the situations where you're on the internet or somebody knocks at your door and say, congratulations, you get free solar panels. So that it's a little bit gimmicky. But it's not necessarily the wrong choice. So everybody has to make their own choice. But a power purchase agreement would be, for instance, if Sunrun owned the panels and you agreed to buy the electricity from those panels for 20 years at a certain rate. And the rate naturally is, for it to be attractive, is going to be less than you're paying for Eversource. So maybe instead of 35 cents, it would be 32 cents or 28 cents or whatever the case may be. It is a 20-year contract. So if you leave that house, the person moving in is going to have to sign on to that contract. And that can produce some difficulties, but usually if people are plan ahead and recognize what you have to do, there's a little lien that's on the property that has to be taken care of. It's very manageable if it's handled properly. A lease is leasing the equipment, and then you get the electricity. I think a PPA is probably a little more common. Excuse me. And if your roof doesn't qualify and you still want to go solar, community solar is a different option. So that's where a developer will get a parcel of land and put up maybe 500 or 1,000 solar panels. And if we couldn't fit 20 solar panels on a roof, we could have secured the electricity from 20 solar panels in that community solar array. And that, again, is a 20-year contract. So it's a little more direct than just checking, I want green electricity on your Eversource bill. And you could actually visit your solar panels if you wanted to. The electrons aren't sent right to your house. All this is done through some very fancy administrative work through Eversource. It's all part of the net metering program, which we're going to get into again a little bit later. I know it's promising. I thought this slide was gone. That's a little too complicated, I think, to go into. So when would you want a battery, or when would you not want a battery? Batteries are really great to have. The electricity goes out. Some batteries kick on, the lights don't even blink. Other batteries goes dark for 5 seconds or so, and then the lights come back on. Well, it will back up. It will back up your loads as long as the battery has juice. So you don't put an air conditioner on it. You don't put an induction stove on it. You don't charge your car on it. You may not even want to put your toaster on it, because that's actually 1,500 watts. It'll run lights for a long time. It'll run your internet for a long time, your security system for a long time, but it won't run coffee makers and dryers and things like that for as long. So the nice thing about it, when it's working ideally, is it's sized properly so that it runs the things you need it to run. And then the next morning when the sun comes out, assuming your panels aren't covered with 3 feet of snow, the sun hits your panels and recharges the battery. And so you're running off the solar panels during the day and charging the battery. And then at night, you can deplete the battery again. So if it was sized properly, you could, in essence, live off the grid. So if we've had some big electrical sun discharges this year. If there was one that was big enough to damage the grid, you'd be all set if you had the right batteries, even if the grid went down, because you'd be able to replenish it. You don't want to let your battery completely die, because then it's a hard start, and you may not be able to do that till the power comes on. So batteries require a lot more participation from people. They're much more challenging to plan properly, and they may require a fire safety space in the basement, fire rated room, and you may need to monitor them and think carefully about what you're using. And so you may choose between a battery and a generator. I think that's the next the next slide. And they're very different. Generator is going to just sort of, especially if it's on natural gas, like this one looks like it is, it's just going to run whenever you need electricity, or maybe constantly. It's just going to run and produce all your electricity. It's not going to turn your solar panels back on. It's going to make a little more noise. It's going to smell a little worse. It's not quite as elegant as a battery solution. But if you really have to have electricity, if you really depend on it, it's a life or death situation, I would recommend a generator or a battery with a generator. Some people actually like both. And they use the battery as long as they can, and the generator if they absolutely have to. So, as I said, you don't power everything with a battery. Usually what you'll do is set up a separate sub panel with critical loads. So you'll have a circuit that includes some lights. You'll have a circuit that probably includes your TV, so you can see what's going on in the world, your router, security if you have it, be able to charge your phones and that sort of thing. But you'd leave double pole breakers all off. You probably would put your well on if you have one, and that's what I miss the most when we're out of power. And you'd probably put your refrigerator on because that's critical, and that's probably going to be your biggest load. But you'd be careful about what you did put on because the battery isn't going to last forever, and batteries are expensive. You can spend $30,000, $35,000 on a solar array, and you can spend just as much on batteries. So if you decide you're going to do a battery, if you really definitely want a battery, you probably want to install it when you're installing solar rather than a retrofit. Obviously, some of the work's going to be duplicated if you're doing a retrofit, so it's much more efficient to do it all at once. I'm not going to go into all the details. You really want to have a serious discussion if you're getting a battery, though. You really want to understand what it is you're getting, what it's going to do for you, and how it's going to be set up. So it's not quite as simple as choosing a solar array. If you do lose power a lot, we live in the Pine Barrens, so if the wind blows, branches fall. And so if you do tend to lose power a lot and it's annoying, or you have to vacate the house and you just want to put your boiler on it, or if you're away for 6 months in the winter and you want to make sure that you have power just to run your boiler, then a battery might be something worth considering. Battery technology is changing. It's lithium-ion batteries now. There's some new chemistry coming down the pike, and hopefully they're going to start making cars able to charge or discharge, because those are wonderful batteries sitting there in your garage. They're huge batteries. The cost for batteries is all over the place. I don't think this is kind of old. I don't think you're ever going to get a $6,200 battery anymore. I think you're going to probably start at 10 or 12,000 for a battery, and for one. And if you wanted something with a little more resiliency, then you might be more like an $18,000 or $20,000 range for a battery. Batteries are well warranted. Often it's 20,000 cycles, which is a long time. So they can charge and discharge many, many times. And you may say, well, I only have 2 power outages a year. However, there is a program called Connected Solutions where Eversource would really like to have access to your battery, because when it's a real hot, humid, sunny day and they have a real high electricity demand, they're going to have to turn on a peaker power plant. Those are the dirtiest power plants. They're the most expensive. They're often coal. They spin up really quickly and they produce a lot of dirty energy. So what they're trying to do instead to sort of green up their portfolio is, with this program, they just reach into 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 batteries in homes and discharge them with the owner's permission, of course. You sign a contract ahead of time. They don't care if you use the electricity or if it goes through your net meter and out onto the grid, because it's electricity that's on the grid now. Once it's discharged from your battery, now it's on the grid, and it helps to reduce that peak load. Because the peak load is the hardest thing for Eversource to design around. It's probably 20 or 30 or 40 times as high as the average load. The peak load is huge, and everything has to be designed to meet peak load, because we don't want brownouts. We're pretty fussy customers. We don't really want brownouts. So how do you find someone to put solar on? And I don't have a formula for you, because everybody is different. And I've talked to a lot of people who are going solar, and some people are very analytical, and they will, do some research, and then they'll get 3 or 4 companies and 3 or 4 bids, and they'll compare them and get back to them and make sure the details match and so forth and so on. Other people find a neighbor who's very happy with the solar they got, and they go with that person. The way I did is I found somebody I really clicked with this guy. I trusted him, and I didn't go any further. He put the solar on, and it turns out it was a good choice. Maybe I was lucky, I don't know. But you are hiring somebody to work on the most delicate part of your house. It's the roof. And you don't want the lowest price from Craigslist probably up there doing it for the first time. You want somebody who is reputable. Even if it's a little bit more money, you want someone who's reputable. Most of the panels are all pretty much tier 1 panels. Most of the panels are good. There's different ratings. A lot of them are up to 420, 440 watts now. Ours is like 8 years old. It was a 280 watt, and they're 440 now. But you know what your wattage is? I bet yours is over 400. Yeah. They're a little bigger too. So finding a contractor is, if you've done other construction projects, how did you do with that? You know, how did you do it, and were you happy with the result? I think word of mouth is always good. Some people love really big national companies because they feel more comfortable with them. Some people like really small, independently owned, basically town-wide companies. I sort of think a regional, sort of in between, is the sweet spot personally, but it's a matter of opinion. So the incentives and programs, again, we're talking about financial incentives. So there are other incentives that we just sort of brush over a lot of times in solar, but solar really is the low-hanging fruit if you want to do something about emissions. And you want less sulfur dioxide in the air, and you want less carbon dioxide in the air, and you don't want to breathe as much because they're all upwind from us. This is really the low-hanging fruit. But financially, that's the end of my lecture part. Financially, the big one is the federal and state incentives. Net metering is really important. We have probably as good a net metering law in Massachusetts as you can get anywhere. We've got a legislation that is very pro-solar, and the legislation is sort of at odds with the utilities sometimes, and the legislation seems to be coming out on top for the most part. The SMART program is gone. There are production incentives, but the SMART program is gone, and the production incentives are pretty low. So years ago, there were really high production incentives, like 30 cents a kilowatt hour for 10 years. Huge, almost paid for your system. Since then, they're gone, but now the panels are half the price. So it's still just about as good of a deal as it was years ago. The very best time to put solar in your house is 10 years ago, same as planting a fruit tree. The second best time is right now. So the incentives are still good. The federal incentive actually climbed back up. It was scheduled to go down to 22 and then sunset. So it's back up to 30%. And this is a tax credit. This is not a tax deduction. So let's say if you made $60,000 and you owe $10,000 in taxes, and you get a $2,000 tax credit, it doesn't come off your income. It comes off what you owe the IRS. So it's a dollar for dollar value. So you do need to have a tax appetite. If you have rental properties, and you don't really show much income or something along those lines, make sure you can use the tax credit if that's an important decision factor for you. But it's uncapped. If you put a $100,000 system in, that's a $30,000 tax credit, and you could spread it out over a couple of years. The state tax credit's $1,000. That's capped. Everybody gets it. It's the same for everybody. 15%, but it always works out to at least $1,000. The SMART program is now the REC program. REC, which is a renewable energy certificate. So every time you produce 1,000 kilowatt hours, you mint one energy certificate, and then you sell it on the open market. Those are the green incentives that people trade in. It's not worth a lot of money, maybe something like $300 a year. But over 10 years, it's a 10-year. Actually, that's not a 10-year program. That's forever program. So over the life of the system, that might be $6,000. So you take a $30,000 system, you're taking $9,000, $10,000 off in tax incentives, and maybe $6,000 off in the RECs. So did anybody do the math? It's hard to do math when you're up in front of people. What does that work out to? 30,000 minus 10 is 20, minus 6, and now you're down to 14,000, about half the cost. And that's going to be paid for, the RECs are going to just dribble in. They're drip, drip, drip. And so is your electrical savings. You're not going to get a big lump sum like you do with the tax credit, but it's savings every month. There is no sales tax on the equipment. If the equipment is $20,000 of the cost of the system, there's no 6.25% tax on it. So that's nice. And even though it increases the value of your home, there's no increased tax on your home. So if it increases the value of your home by $35,000, they can't assess that. They can't charge you that it's for 20 years, and by then it's depreciated. Those are just two. Well, the SMART program, the last three are Massachusetts incentives. The last four are Massachusetts incentives. There's about 8 more. Some of them are kind of small. Those are the big ones. And a lot of states don't have any, especially if you're in the deep south or the Sun Belt, where it's really, really sunny and you think this is going to be a great place to go solar. Well, it isn't, because electricity is like dirt cheap. It's like 12 cents, and you don't have any incentives. It's actually a better deal here. So I mentioned net metering a little bit. I think I've maybe covered it pretty well, but I'll just review a little bit. People kind of wonder how it all works. A lot of people think you're selling electricity back to Eversource. Well, you sort of are, but they're only going to give you a credit for it. They're not going to give you money for it. So the ideal system, our first year was almost perfect in our house. We didn't know how much electricity we were going to need, and we didn't know how much it was going to produce, but we were hoping that we're going to be close together. And we got to like a week before the 1-year anniversary, and we were like 20 kilowatt hours behind. So no showers, no cooking, turn the lights off, but we didn't quite make it. So if your system is perfectly designed, then you will bank hours in the summer generally, because the sunlight is such long hours in the summer. So maybe by October, you're going to be at your maximum bankage. So your electric bill might be negative $300 in October. And then November, maybe negative 260. Then December, negative 200, and so forth and so on, until you get to around April or May, when it gets to be around 0. And then in June, maybe negative 50. So it's going to start negative again. So you build up this credit, and then you burn off the credit during the winter. If you have electric heat, then you're kind of upside down, because you're producing all the electricity in the summer, and you need it all in the winter. So as long as you're in Eversource territory, that's okay. But if you're in one of these municipal power plant towns, it's a little awkward, because they don't have as good of a net metering law. They might only give you wholesale rate instead of retail rate. So here in Eversource land, we get like 98% of face value. It's almost all of it. The SMART program is gone. I already said that the property value, well, I guess I wasn't explicit. The property value does increase when you put solar on. And there is a tool I'm going to show you in a few minutes that assessors can actually use, appraisers can use to justify the cost. And basically what it's going to say is, if you just spent $35,000 on a solar array, even though you're going to get a $10,000 tax credit or more, it's still a $35,000 add-on to the value of your home. The add-on is full price, not after incentives. And that depreciates over 20 years. So if you've had the system on for 2 years, the value might be $31,000 from that. And after 10 years, it might be $17,000. And it just depreciates until after 20 years, there's no value remaining. And that can be calculated. And it can actually be calculated and presented if you were selling your house, because it's as if you've got prepaid electricity on the roof. Home insurance has usually there isn't any effect to home insurance. When we put solar on, I called them up and they said send us the invoice. So I sent them the invoice, and they increased the value of the house by $24,000. And I don't think it even increased the premiums. I don't think they even adjusted them. It's not a special risk. It's not like well, I hope I don't offend anybody, but it's not like a Doberman pinscher. Does anybody have a Doberman pinscher? I think they increase your homeowner's insurance policy. Trampoline, something like that. It's not a risk. It's just a little more value. This is the appraisers tool that I was talking about. It's hosted by a government site, Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, and you can go on there, and they've got a number of tools. You can sort of calculate your some solar production numbers, and you can calculate the value added. So I hope I covered everything. There's usually a lot of questions, and so I hope there are. Solar can be kind of confusing. You know, I was actually on the energy committee in Marshfield for about 10 years, and I didn't really start understanding solar until I started designing and selling it, because it just becomes a little bit complicated and a little bit confusing. So I hope I wasn't confusing today. I was trying to demystify it a little bit. I'm also going to put up. It's the wrong slide deck, so it doesn't have my contact info. I was going to put my contact info up for you, but that's not going to work. Maybe I can find the other one. But I would be happy to come to, if you have other organizations who would like a presentation, I am happy to do that, or just be a general knowledge base. I've spoken in front of realty groups a lot because I'm also a realtor, or at least I was. So anyway, enough of that. How about some questions? Sir.
Basic question. Two. What is the thermodynamic efficiency of the photovoltaics?
Okay, the question was, what's the thermodynamic efficiency? And I think you're asking how much of the sunshine do they turn into electricity? Yeah. So they've been inching up. There haven't been any real breakthroughs.
That's what I'm asking now.
I think we're around 28% now.
28%.
But the other thing I will mention that you reminded me of is that solar panels work a lot better in the cold. Speaking of thermal efficiency, solar panels love the cold. They love cold weather. The colder it is, the more they produce. The same sunshine on a cold day will produce a lot more electricity. So that's another reason it's good here in New England. I believe so. I believe so.
The efficiency of the existing batteries. Again, thermodynamics.
I believe, I'm not sure without looking at their literature, but I believe it's probably around 80 or 90%.
80, 90?
80 or 90%, I'm not sure which, but I will add something that you reminded me. I'm sorry?
85 plus minus 5.
Yes, that's a good way to put it. A panel or a battery in your ensemble also has a energy usage. So you're going to use maybe 1,000 kilowatt hours a year just to maintain your battery. So there's also a penalty, a kilowatt hour penalty of having a battery. It's a luxury. You know, it's expensive and it takes some power to maintain it, but it's really nice to have when the power's out. Yes, sir. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's a great question. His panel is how many, or his question is how many panels does it take to make a 2 kW or a 12 kW? If you're up to a 400 watt panel, then 5 400 watt panels would be 2,000 watts. That would be a 2K. So I think 400 would be a reasonable expectation, 400 watts per panel. So if you divided 12,000 by 400, I'm not sure what that would be. It would be 24 maybe. Mm-hmm. 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 Okay, and how many batteries would you put in? It depends on what you want to hook up to them. So if you only want to hook up your boiler and your lights, then 2 batteries are probably fine. If you want to run your house, if you want to party all night long and run it as if the grid's still on, you might need. I've had as many as 5 batteries put in at a home. Mm-hmm. But he also had like 50 panels put in, and I said to him, you know, this is going to produce a lot more electricity than you need in a year. He says, don't worry about it, because he was mining Bitcoin in situ. He said, don't worry, I'm going to use it all.
There's been specialized special Massachusetts back in January, and it required pre-solarized.
Mm-hmm. Yes. What Anatol is talking about is when you build a house, you can build it ready for solar. So the idea is that vent pipes and soil pipes, keep them off the south-facing roof, keep them out of the way, keep them to the edges, keep them to the top. Plumbers put them right above the bathroom. They put them right where they want to. They don't care where it goes because it hasn't mattered. if you have a dormer, try to arrange your dormers so that you're more likely to have a place for solar panels, maybe a shed dormer instead of a gable dormer, although that's not part of the code. The other part of the code is to have a conduit in place so that you can run wires up to the conduit in place. That's not really that critical, because you can always run a conduit on the outside of a house, and any solar company worth their salt can do that pretty discreetly. But that it's always nice to have them inside. But solar ready is, there's actually a couple of communities that are requiring solar. Watertown, in California, there's a solar requirement for new construction that usually has a minimum size, like maybe 3,000 square feet. There are some jurisdictions that are moving in that direction that are starting to legislate solar, but it's, kind of few and far between. Solar ready makes a lot of sense, though. Yeah. Yes.
Do you have any special rule for construction or
His question was, does Plymouth have any special rules for solar? Oh, restrictions for solar. There was a project I did in Duxbury once that there was a restriction because it was a historic zone. It's on First Parish Church, next to Mayflower Cemetery in Duxbury. So it had to be very discreet. Couldn't be on, facing the street. I imagine there probably is some historic zones in Plymouth that there would be restrictions. And generally when there are, and a lot of the Cape has restrictions, generally the restrictions, and in fact, Pine Hills has restrictions, right? It has to be on the back of the house. So there are places where it has, the visibility has to be taken into account. And some towns they have restrictions about ground mount too. You can't do ground mount in some towns. So it's town by town. Yeah.
In my neighborhood, there have been people that didn't like the fact that the panels jut out on the surface of the roof. And that makes the question of the repairs of the roof versus of the panels two separate questions. The aesthetics of it have been brought to question, and it has put a damper on the whole works. Do you have a solution for that?
He's asking about the aesthetics because panels are always elevated a little bit above the roof. There's that rack and there's that airspace underneath. There have been a number of companies who have tried to make solar shingles work. That's sort of the holy grail, solar shingles. Nail them on and it just looks like a roof. But nobody's been able to pull it off. It hasn't worked. So that's maybe in the future. There are some ways to install closer to the roof, so it's lower. And if you were a little ingenious, you could always build a roof that had a little higher portions on the edges, and then sort of a pocket area for the solar panel, so it would all be on the same plane. But generally speaking, the answer is no, that they are elevated because they're stood off on the roof with those L feet. So generally there is an airspace.
What about the shingles that are open cells?
I'm sorry, say solar shingles. Yeah, GAF tried them and pulled them off the market. Tesla tried them and pulled them off the market. A few companies have tried, but they have not gotten to market. They haven't worked. There are some advertisements for them still. I think Tesla advertises them still, but I don't think people are actually getting them installed. Sorry? Yes, they will give you a quote. They will give you a quote and they will take your money, but you may not see the panels for a long time. Tesla also is, believe it or not, the lowball solar company. So I would go up against them sometimes and they'd be like $1 per watt less, which is huge on a 7,000, 10,000 watt system. But they're a cookie cutter. You had to get 24 panels. It had to be a perfect rectangle. You got no project manager, you got no designer, you got no salesman. You did all those things yourself. And they were using sort of an off-brand panel, and they're using central inverters, which are cheaper. So there is an instance where people sometimes look at the bottom line, and if your roof is the right shape, it might work for you. But if you like to actually talk to humans, then you're probably better off looking elsewhere. Yes, sir. Uh, So I think what he's describing is, if you're doing a large project, you have to you have to meet a certain performance standard, like a HERS rating. Yes, and panels will bring your HERS rating down. So if you've got to get a HERS rating of 60 and everything you do, you can only get to 70, you can put some panels up and that'll bring your HERS rating down to 60. No, it doesn't say, but that's one way to do it. Right. The code gives you options. It can be more insulation, more efficient appliances, but solar panels is another option. Yes, ma'am. Is there any maintenance was the question. Generally, there's no maintenance at all. There's no regular maintenance. Some people wash them a little bit from time to time. With microinverters and I think with the central inverter as well. I'm more familiar with microinverters. You can monitor the panels from your cell phone and you'll get a monthly report. So you would know if there was a problem. It can happen. Microinverters, if something's going to fail, it's probably going to be the microinverter, not the panel, because there's a lot of electricity going through a microinverter, but it's very uncommon. Enphase is a big microinverter company, and at this time, if they have a failure, they will send you a check for $500 as well, to get someone to pull the panel off and replace for the labor to pull the panel off and replace the inverter. So it's pretty much plug and play. I've never had, on our two houses, we've never had a maintenance issue. If you have a big system, if you have hundreds and hundreds of panels, you probably will notice that there are some things that require maintenance here and there. Yes, sir. Art. It does. That's a great question. And I really should have covered that. So thank you for asking that. The general rule of thumb for a lot of solar installers is if the roof is within 10 years of new, go ahead and install. If it's more than that, then you're probably better off replacing the roof first, depending on the condition of the roof and how long it was rated for and so forth. But these panels are going to produce, after 25 years, these panels are still going to be at like 94% efficient. They're going to still be kicking out a lot of electricity and there's no need to replace them or take them down. So you don't really want to. You don't want to have to take them off to replace the roof. I have seen that happen. I have seen people put panels on when a roof was really a little older than it appeared to be, and the panels had to come off and get stored, and then a new roof put on and the panels put back on. So it can be done, but it's a $5,000 expense. So you're better off probably replacing the roof ahead of time.
City's bad saying that, if you get solar, the state incentives will help you pay for your roof.
Mm-hmm.
Is
there anybody from the IRS here? The code's pretty explicit. The code says, the IRS code says that it is for solar panels and the necessary wiring. Some people have interpreted that, and I think there's been a change to that to mean that if I need a new roof to put solar on, I'm going to include that. Or if I need to upgrade my main service panel, I'm going to include that. Or even if I'm building a new house and it's 3,000 feet from the street and I have to trench all the way there and put in, $20,000 worth of wire, I'm going to include that because I want to hook my solar up to the grid. That would be between you and your accountant. It's a little bit of a stretch. I mean, a purist, a cautious accountant would probably say no, but a more aggressive accountant might say, yeah, we can include that. Sir? Not lightning strike, no, because the whole system is grounded. I did have a project once that the barn had been hit several times by lightning already. And it didn't disturb our construction manager at all because we ground with heavy cable. You know, the racking is aluminum. And so that would conduct quite nicely, but it's grounded with copper wire. One risk might be firemen sometimes don't like to see panels edge to edge on a roof because if there's a fire, they like to vent the roof. In some cases, they get up there with the axe and they put a hole in the roof. And if the whole thing's covered with panels, they can't. So usually there aren't panels on both sides, number one. And number two, there's always a shutoff. So there's not an outside shutoff. So there's not a shock hazard for firefighters. And number three, in New Hampshire, I have a picture from New Hampshire of a firehouse with panels edge to edge. So they didn't mind. But there are some considerations there. I've never heard of panels causing a fire. The fire marshal in Massachusetts has decided that batteries are really interesting to him. And he sprung these regulations on us overnight. First thing he said was it has to be in a fireproof room with a sprinkler. And then they backed off the sprinkler once they realized that would spread the fire, I guess. So now it's just a fireproof room. And every town's a little bit different. Some towns, once you put something in the basement, you can't finish the basement. Some towns just want it in an unfinished basement. Some towns only in the garage. Some towns you just have to put 5/8 fire code sheetrock around the room. So it's town by town and it's evolving. So there's a lot of new regulation and new technology around batteries. You had your hand up for a while now? Uh-huh. Well, is Sunrun a nonprofit? Oh, they make money? Sunrun makes money? There's a few parts to that question, really, and it's a very good question. My feeling is whoever you put between you and the solar panels, you're not going to gather quite as much financial benefit from them because they're going to be gathering it. Okay. Right. Well, and it should be reflected in the rate. Did they tell you what your electric rate would be? Okay. Okay. Well, look at the escalator too, because they're going to give you an electric rate and it's going to go up at a certain percentage, 3.5. Okay. So some people are much more comfortable renting, leasing the equipment or a power purchase agreement because they don't want to put the money up front and they're just more comfortable with it. And that's great. They're going solar. I mean, that's the overriding goal to me. But if you're really looking for the most financial benefit, you want to be the investor. You want to own it. I think it might be a little bit harder. If you own it, it's an asset. It's increased the value of your house. If Sunrun owns it, it's their asset. And so it increases the value of their bottom line. And you can't really, I mean, the people moving in might love solar and say, oh, great. Or they might hate solar. You don't know. But you can't really advertise it as a value added to your house if it's a lease. So my opinion is purchase is better. In fact, I had some people in Pine Hills once who put a system on because they wanted to stand out from the competition. They knew they were going to be selling their house in X number of years, and they wanted their house to be solar powered because there's always houses on the market, at least there were at the time. And I'd be glad to stick around and share my contact information. I was going to put it on a slide, but I apparently picked the wrong slideshow.
Bill Wolf's hanging around here and answer all the questions.